Welcome to the College Football Preview Show presented by Yolked. I'm your host, John Sarianides. And as always, I'm joined by my partner, Ryan Barry. Ryan, how are you this evening?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Down the Cape here for a couple weeks, and nice to catch up with family. And it's a nice part of the year to visit here because kind of not as many people here. You get to kind of enjoy it yourself, and football's on too, so it's kind of like a win-win. So feeling pretty good. Hope you are too.
It's interesting that you say that because my mother-in-law used to rent a place down there this weekend. It was the second weekend of September, and it was great. I mean,
Yeah,
beach was wide open. It's still nice and warm.
yeah.
So you get the beach to yourself, and not a lot of people down there. But I do. I miss it when she used to rent down there because it's a great time of year to get away for a little bit.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
so well, before we get started here, I do want to mention that we are brought to you by Yolked. Feel free to visit yolked.com today for some of the best protein powder in the business. If you are into ramping up your workouts and you want a safe and effective protein powder that tastes great and helps you get results, well, Yolked is that product. Visit yolked.com today for more information. You can also check out their team specials for athletic programs as well. They got some good stuff going on throughout the year. Again, visit yoke.com today. All right, Ryan, we're going to start off by just looking back in the week that was. And that week, of course, was week 2 in New England college football, specifically Division I college football. I don't want to spend a lot of time on BC's 56-0 drubbing of Duquesne. Impressive performance by Tommy Castellanos. Throws 4 touchdown passes in the win. It's more about Missouri. We're not going to reflect on a game that was over at the end of the first quarter. Boston College has a big one. I mean, they've entered the top 25 here. They're ranked 24th in the country. Real quick, I want to get your thoughts on that. And we're going to preview the Missouri game here in a little bit. But, I mean, how much do you think they're the 24th best team in the country? Are they legitimately one of the 25 best teams in the country? Or do you think this is a byproduct of Bill O'Brien being there and there not being a lot of quality teams in the bottom of the top 25?
I do think it's been a kind of strange start to the college football season, and I think that are they the 24th best? Probably not. But because I'm pretty sure Northern Illinois is number 25. If I'm, in all due respect, I know they just beat, Notre Dame, but even if they went, 7-4, 8-5 this season, I don't know how well they would do against certain other teams, right? These rankings can be kind of arbitrary, but I do think that there's so much fever behind BC football, and I think the fact they beat Florida State, and they, really took down an FCS school, which you're supposed to do in that position. I think there's a little bit of swagger to it. And I think they're kind of like, you know what? Yeah, why don't we put them there? They're probably top 30, top 35 right now as it stands. So why not put them 24? And I think in some ways it also helps a lot of buzz for the Mizzou game on Saturday because you got 24 versus 6 looks a lot better, right? As opposed to just a scrappy BC team. So I think it's awesome. First time since 2018. Disappointed to hear people on the local radio station saying they'd rather sell insurance than talk about BC football, but I'm happy that we're the ones at least doing it because it's a great thing. Like we talked about last week, there's a lot of fans of that game on Saturday, right? A friend of mine with season tickets and his dad usually don't go to those games. They went on Saturday because there's just a lot of fever, but they just want to be part of it and see it. So that alone is what I think is what's so important about them there. And I think that, yeah, I think they would beat, an Auburn squad right now who looks terrible. I think it'd be a close game against a lot of those teams that you might perceive as being, in that 20 to 40 range. So, yeah, I think it's totally fair.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, going down to Tallahassee and winning the way they did was impressive. They beat Duquesne NEC program 56-0, but they're 2-0. They're playing with a lot of momentum. Going into Missouri, if they find a way to win this game, conversation now starts to shift. Now you have to start to consider them an ACC contender. And can they win the ACC? And, of course, if they win the ACC, they get an automatic berth into the 12-team playoff. So it's early in the year. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. But if they find a way to go out there and win this game, and, again, we're going to break it down momentarily here, I think it sets them up for a lot of other things coming up. It's disappointing to hear people in the local media say that, because I think that these people must not have been living here in the early 90s when BC football was bigger than the Patriots. Late 80s, early 90s, Boston college football was bigger than the Patriots. So we could sit here and we could talk about, they could sit there, I should say, and mentally masturbate who's going to play quarterback for the Patriots 8,000 times a
Yeah.
day. But at the end of the day,
Yeah.
Boston college football does matter. And if you don't want to cover it, perfect. We appreciate it. Thank you, because we would love to be the ones that are there first and foremost.
Right.
So we love that you don't want to be there. We'll be there. And I think at the end of the day, that's all that matters. We take pride in being a football-only website, so we'll be more than glad to cover these programs and give them the coverage they so richly deserve, because they do. All right, let's talk about the alma mater here. Obviously, tough loss on Saturday, losing to Toledo 38-23. Look, here's the thing, and I said this in my top 16 poll. It's a moral victory in the sense that they played better. They played well in some areas of the game. The problem is it's year 3 of the Don Brown experience. You have to be beyond moral victories now. You have to win games like this. They're not at a place right now, Ryan, where they can win games like this.
Yeah, I think I said it last week. I think I said it for the Eastern Michigan game, and it's just like it's the same song and dance every time where you're like, all right, it is a moral victory in the sense you didn't get blown out, because Toledo has really been taking it to UMass the last few years in a lot of the games they've been playing. So the fact that they were in the game, it was close. But then, you squint really hard, you look at why they lost. You're like, okay, kick return touchdown. They were in the bottom 3 in the FBS last year for special teams. One explosive play, 75-yard touchdown. It's just like, these are the things that you're just like, come on, like you're supposed to be getting over these things, right? It's like you said, it's year 3. These are the things that are supposed to separate you from the program that you said is on the rise, and is coming, versus the team that you have been since 2012. And I think that is just what's so frustrating, where, this is another year where so many people I know were sitting here going, no, like, sorry, it's not a moral victory, right? It's like, sorry, you should be winning that game. If you're close, you should be winning it. This isn't 2013, 2014, where you're like, oh, hey, we hung around Toledo. They're a pretty good team. It's no, sorry, you got to win these games at this point. It's a loss, right? And it'd be a moral victory to me if we lost by 20 to Georgia, right? Like, at this point, it's like you hang with these teams, you just don't win. Like, it's a failure, right? And we'll talk about it when we get to our preview, but you saw Don Brown over, on Saturday. He made a comment about they're a young team, and then I think a lot of people jumped on him and said, you actually have a lot of upperclassmen. And then on Monday he comes out and says, well, I was talking, he made a comment not specifically to that, but saying, oh, it's we have a lot of new guys, which is true. That is 100% true. You're a team that has a lot of
not
new
to
guys.
cut you off, but isn't that the reality of today's transfer portal centric world?
But you hit it on the head, which when people heard that Saturday, like, oh, well, you're not that old, right? But then, on Monday, you're like, well, we have a lot of new faces, which is fair and true. But so do every team that you're playing, right? I mean, DeQuan Finn from Toledo was the best quarterback in the MAC last year, and they lost him, and they still put up,
He's at Baylor now.
Yeah, they still put up 38 points. Eastern Michigan had 25 transfers, or something crazy like that, and they put up, 28 points on you. So it's just like, it's hard to hear those things, because it's true, but it's not like as if you're the only team facing that. And I think that you hear comments like that, you hear people talking, you hear these, okay, we played better, but still lost. It's a moral victory. But it's like, I'm just kind of tired of that. You got to do something new. And I think that's just kind of where people are at, where it's just like, if you lose again Saturday, it really is like, man, like, it's not even like if you get rid of people, I don't even know what does it, right? It's just this constant loop of just feeling so like, what the heck are you supposed to do? So that's really what it felt like on Saturday. I don't care you were down close at one point, you still lost. 8 of 25 was that starting quarterback for throwing. It's not like he had a great game, and you defended the run well, and you had the ball more and had more yards, but you still can't win. It's just like, it feels like you're playing a video game on varsity mode or whatever, and it's ridiculous. So anyway, that's that. But yeah.
We will be previewing the UMass at Buffalo game here shortly. UConn bounces back after a 50-7 loss to Maryland with an impressive 63-17 win over Merrimack. Now, look, here's the thing. Merrimack almost beat Air Force. They lost 21-6 the week before. I thought that this game was going to be a lot closer than it actually was. If you're a UConn fan, on the one hand, you're saying to yourself, all right, we beat Merrimack, whoopee-doo. But this is a big win. This is a big win because this is a program that needed that that kind of win where they can assert themselves and their talent can assert themselves and they can gain confidence. And I think this game is that kind of win for them. Okay. I don't care that it's against Merrimack. I mean, Skylar Bell had 2 catches for like 105 yards and a touchdown. Like, Joe Fagnano threw 5 touchdown passes. Like, you needed this kind of game for your program. You needed this kind of game for your offense. You got it. I don't care that it was against Merrimack. Merrimack could have beat Air Force a week before. We know Coach Giannetti and his staff do a great job there. Don't poo-poo them, because that's been a program that's been pretty good in recent years. This is a nice win for UConn. I've had some UConn faithful tell me that, big deal, they beat Merrimack. Take it, because 63-17 wins don't come around every day.
When you're a program like UConn, a program like UMass, you have to celebrate those wins as like win plus, right? Or like win squared, where it's just like, oh yeah, like we are at this point. We can handle our business against FCS schools. We're not keeping these games close. You're supposed to win these games. I mean, Joe Fagnano needs these type of games to gain that confidence, especially missing all last year and having a tough start last week, right? Like he needs these games. You had 10 guys with at least 1 catch. You're spreading the ball around. It's what you're supposed to do in that position, and they handle their business. And like you said, if Merrimack hadn't lost so close to Air Force, I think that maybe I can maybe see people being like, oh, well, it's just Merrimack. But it's like, well, this is just the Merrimack team that almost won the NEC last year.
Right, and they lost 21-6 to an FBS school in week 1.
Right, so I think you could still celebrate that. Be like, hey, UMass, it didn't take, it was almost at the late fourth, the fourth quarter when they pulled away from Merrimack last year, right? So it's like, it's not easy to beat a team like that, and they handled them quite easily, so 56-7 at halftime is nothing to slouch about. So
no, of course the Huskies head to Duke this weekend before they come home for the rest of the season. I mean, their schedule is ridiculous. Oh, yeah. They have like 6 straight at home. Like, kudos to that athletic department. Yeah. Get that schedule. Good for them. And listen, Kevin's traditionally been bullish on BC. I've traditionally been more bullish than I should be on UConn, but I believe in Jim Moore. I believe in the vision. I mean, they should find a way here, even though they've got some tough games within those 6 straight at home. They need to find a way to end up in bowl contention here. The schedule is set up for you to do that. So I wasn't as bullish on them last year as I am this year, even though I thought they had a better roster in some key spots last year. Remember that the staff did a tremendous job in the portal this offseason. So that's why that week 1 loss in Maryland was so disappointing. You were at Fitton Field this past Saturday for UNH Holy Cross. UNH comes from behind and win 21-20. What a game. Honestly, big win for UNH. Hat tip to Ricky Santos and his staff. If you're Dan Curran at Holy Cross, though, you could very easily be 2-0 right now. I mean, that's a disappointing loss. Now, look, this Holy Cross program has kind of been the benchmark around here the last 4 years. But like I said, they could very easily be 2-0. I mean, that game, the URI game could have gone their way. This game could have gone their way. Tough loss for Holy Cross. They got a rebound. They go to Bryant this week. UNH returns home for their home opener against Stonehill, but big win for UNH.
Yeah, they've struggled there the past few years, and I think the ability to get a win was huge. I think for a program, too, that a lot of people are not really expecting much this year. They're picked in the middle of the CAA in the preseason poll, and everyone's talking about all the losses that they have. So I think, like I wrote in my preview for them, they're kind of flying under the radar with that, because a lot of people are just like, well, I think they'll be solid, but I don't know how solid they're going to be able to be ranked. And this week they received some votes, right, which I think is an indictment of how important this win was, and especially to bounce back. I know it's UCF and they're expected to win, but it was a tough game, right? And it's a tough loss, no matter how big that is. So to bounce back like this, and the amount of times that, they almost gave the ball away, they had 2 turnovers in the red zone. There was so many times, but they kept battling back, and they showed a lot of adversity. And I do wonder about Holy Cross. I mean, I worry about, luckily it's year 1 of Dan Curran. If this were year 3, or, they're losing games like this, I would, as a fan, I'd be like, well, hey, maybe it's time to start winning these games. But I think because it's so early, it's there. He has the guys. He has the ability to coach. I think it's just about, getting them all on the same page and being a little more disciplined. But really happy with UNH. Isaac Seed with, a career day, 161 yards. 161. There we go. Yeah. And Logan Tomlinson, I think he might be the best, at least top 3 best wide receivers in all of New England. Just crazy good hands, like brings in every catch and is big and physical. So I'm excited to see where UNH can go. They've got a run of games here that they can. I think that they'll be ranked by the end of September.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, Seth Morgan is starting to get comfortable now. He can play in the system. They're only going to get better on offense. And we know what they can do on defense. I mean, they've got a lot of talent at all 3 levels with Silver and Ruiz, Toscano, Wandy Owens in the back end, the Yale transfer. So they've got talent. Question is, can they put it all together and make that run? Like you said, the schedule is certainly set up nicely for them. URI suffers a tough 48-0 loss to former UNH quarterback Max Brosmer and the Minnesota Golden Gophers. And the story in this one was defense played well early, kept them in it. Offense really couldn't do anything. Defense wore down in the second half. Minnesota pulled away. Tough loss for the Rams. They come back home this weekend to take on Campbell. Look, coming off a big win over Holy Cross in week 1, I don't want to sound negative when I say this, right? But I don't know too many people around here that were saying, hey, they can go into Minnesota and win. Could they? Of course. I mean, Minnesota is not Alabama, but I think that this game is a reminder, though, or was a reminder, I should say, of the physical difference between FBS and FCS. That URI defense played well. They hung in there, but ultimately the cream rises, and Minnesota was just more physically superior. They were the better team, and they pulled away.
Yeah, I think we did our picks last year. I had them to cover, and I was like pretty surprised by the end of the day to see just like, not even score any points. 3 interceptions from the quarterback room, only 117 passing yards. A fumble. It was a little upset to see because I just thought they'd have momentum after the Holy Cross game, and Max Brosmer kind of had a tough week 1 against UNC. Minnesota didn't look that great. They're kind of a 6-6 Big Ten team, so I thought it'd be a little bit closer, but you lick your wounds and you move on. Like, luckily they get this game out of the way, the FBS game, so they can just focus on the FCS slate.
Yeah, and of course, as I mentioned, they have Campbell coming to town, and we'll talk about that game shortly. Maine losing out at Montana State 41-24. Look, we talk about moral victories all the time, but if you're Jordan Stevens, there's a moral victory there. I mean, that Montana State program is one of the best at FCS. To be able to go out there and hang with them, I think you're seeing real progress from this Maine program. The Mercer transfer, Carter Peavy, played pretty well, kept them in the game. Offensively, I think the Black Bears are going to be pretty good. They're going to be pretty potent. We know about their skill that they have back. Heisey at tight end, Montego Moss, Joe Gillette at wide receiver. They've got a really good skill group back, and Peavy seems to be a nice fit for that group. They've got some good experience up front. So while, moral victories suck and you don't want to keep talking about them, you got to give Jordan Stevens and his staff credit here. I mean, to go out there and to play as well as they did and hang in there with a pretty good program like that, I think that says a lot.
Yeah, I mean, they had a tough first half, but I think the ability to battle back and give it a game is what's so impressive against a team that every year is in the Final Four of the FCS playoffs, right? I mean, they got to figure out the run game a little bit. They allowed 344 rushing yards. But, Carter Peavy, I thought, played okay.
But Montana State does that to a lot of people.
Right, yeah. If you're doing that against, Monmouth this weekend, I think you've got a serious problem. But, I think that as Carter Peavy gets more settled in, if someone had Maine going, 2-9, I'd be hard pressed to think that, that was a bad pick, right? I think that they're going to start to kind of figure things out here.
Yeah, no, I agree. And of course, as you mentioned, they do have Monmouth at home this weekend. We'll talk about that here shortly. Big win for CCSU, picking up a 33-3 win over Fordham. Brady Olson throwing a couple of touchdown passes, the UMass transfer. Look, Adam Lechtenberg, tough loss week 1 against Central Michigan, but that's Central Michigan. I've said this all offseason. I love that he beefed up the schedule. I love it. I think it's what this program needed. This is a program that has had success in the past. In order to get it back there, I think you need to raise the profile of the program. That's why you hire a guy like Lechtenberg, the former Virginia Tech assistant, and he's done that. This was an impressive win. Fordham has been one of the better programs in the Patriot League the last couple of years. I mean, this is, like I said, you got a tough one this week. They travel to St. Francis, who's coming off a win over Kent State. But this is a big win nonetheless for the Blue Devils.
Yeah, CJ Montes is a good quarterback for Fordham. This is a program that was picked, I believe, first or second in the Patriot League preseason poll. And to go out there for the Blue Devils, you force 5 fumbles and, Julius Left-Rye with a big game. I couldn't be more thrilled. I was so surprised, to be honest with you, to see that scoreline, because I thought that I picked Fordham to win that game, and I was hoping that it'd be closer than I thought, but to only not allow a single touchdown was unbelievably impressive. And you know, Brady Olson is showing Blue Devils fans, kind of who he is, right? He 50% passer ratings, got a great arm, makes some strong throws, but might throw, a couple tough ones. He had 2 interceptions, but I think that as he gets more comfortable, I think he could really help this team this year. So I'm happy to see him settling in as well. And I had this game, I think, in that menu of best games like per week. I think this was the dessert one, and I think it served up pretty well considering that they won. So I'm pretty pumped about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Bryant survived against Division II Franklin Pierce, winning 21-17. Jared Guest threw 3 touchdown passes to Landon Ruggieri in that one. Guest had a pretty good game, as did Ruggieri. But you got to win these games by more than 4 points. No disrespect to Franklin Pierce. They built a nice program up there. But if you're Chris Merritt, this is a disappointing performance coming off a week 1 loss to Delaware and knowing you have Holy Cross coming into town this weekend. You would have hoped, despite the fact that they have a lot of new faces and some young guys starting, you would have hoped your team would have played better.
Yeah, the game was tied at halftime. Because you look at those stat lines, like, like Jared Guest, Landon Ruggieri, they had pretty good games. And you look at the stat line, oh, man, they only won by 4 points. And there's something about, I think, the dynamic where, like, in FCS school, losing to something about AA feels like worse than an FCS over, FBS in some ways, so the fact that it was this close probably doesn't feel great, but it's one of those things, like we are saying, how like we knew this was going to be a transition year. It was going to be a tough year. And, even though all of that, you still hope they win by more, but you still won the game. You still got more reps in. And, if this game is maybe in a couple of weeks, I don't think it'd be as close.
And Guest is the Coastal Carolina transfer. He's proving that, Chris Merritt named him the starter pretty early on. I mean, they told me in the spring that they were pretty comfortable with him. And then at CAA Media Day, he officially named him the starter, and he's proven him to be right so far. I mean, he's experienced. He's got a live arm. He's athletic. He started at the FBS level. So, you know what? I think he's going to only get better and more comfortable in that system. Ruggieri's a stud. He's going to be all CAA. He's one of the best receivers in the conference, one of the best receivers in FCS football. But to your point, they've got to play better. And maybe if they play this game a week or 2 down the road, they probably win by more. But you needed a big win here to go into that Holy Cross game with some momentum. They got the win, but it left a little something to be desired. Speaking of D1 and D2 matchups, Sacred Heart beating St. Anselm's 10-3. And man, the Pioneers just can't get the offense going. They'll play good defense all year. They really will. They'll play. That's been their calling card in that program for years under Mark Knopfrey. They'll play really good defense all year. You got Talley back, a linebacker. I mean, he's a tackling machine. Got a really good secondary despite losing Arsheen Giles. But, I mean, they've got to figure it out on offense there. I mean, no, Piles, come on. Let's go. You're setting offensive football back about 50 years here. What are we doing?
Yeah,
No, and listen, I covered them last year against Stonehill. It's not that the coaching's not good, but you have to start to think, all right, do we not recruit the right guys? Do we have to look at the scheme again? I mean, 10 points. Again, no disrespect to St. A's. Coach Adam does a great job up there. But 10 points against a Division II program, that's a good program, but you should be able to do better than 10 points.
Yeah, I mean, they still haven't figured out the quarterback position. I can't remember if it was 2021 or 2022. I went down there and they beat Duquesne, who was one of the better teams in the NEC that year. And to me, that was like, oh, this is the standard. This is who Sacred Heart football is. But the last 2 years, it's just not been like that. I mean, Joe, is it Michalski? Michalski. All right, I just want to make sure I get that right. I mean, he's their primary runner right now. He had 70 yards on Saturday. Jalen Madison was okay, I suppose, but even throwing the ball, they can't seem to get any momentum, and that's been the case for the last 2 years. So, like you said, 10-3 is a tough look again. That's no Drew no disrespect to St. A's, that's a huge, program accomplishment to be so close to a school like that. But St. A's is a lot of guys who are obviously playing D2 football, who are a lot of great high school players, I think, in New England. But you would assume that Sacred Heart, having a bit more of a footprint, should win that game more. So I don't think it bodes well for the rest of the season. I don't think you and I were incredibly high on the Pios coming into this year, but at least they got to win under their belt. But I'm remiss to think there's going to be a lot more coming at the FCS or level with the NEC.
No, and look, I mean, they're an independent. That's tough. They do need to schedule. They need to follow Central Connecticut's lead, though. They do play They do play Delaware in a couple of weeks. But I mean, they host Georgetown this week. They go to Stonehill the following week. Then they go on the road to Delaware. And then they play Norfolk State, Howard, Lafayette, Mercyhurst, LIU, and then they wrap up the season against Merrimack. So a couple of things here. I think they need to figure out a way to recruit more skill, more guys that can make some plays, especially in this day and age in the portal. Those guys are out there. You just have to find a way to get them to your place. And it's easier said than done with NIL and the money. But I think another thing that would help them is beef up the schedule here. It's nice that you're playing Delaware. They played UConn the last couple of years, but they need to play a couple. They need an FBS team on that schedule. They need to raise the profile of the program. That's how you're going to get better talent to come to your place. If those guys know that they're going to go there, develop, get an opportunity to play and play in a couple big games, they'll want to come to your program. We all know the Sacred Heart education is good. Right. But, I mean, again, you got to do better than 10 points here. I mean, this is a game that you probably should put up a 30 spot. And again, it's not disrespecting St. A's, but there is a little bit of a talent gap there. And if you don't capitalize on that talent gap, then you're not doing what you're supposed to do. And I think ultimately that's kind of the dilemma facing this program right now. Stonehill coming off a 37-10 loss to Stony Brook, as I mentioned earlier. They're going to be traveling up to UNH. Asher Karaha had a big game for the Skyhawks, but a lot of the guys that they lost last year, Jermaine Corbett, Cameron Alves, Chris Domercant, they really missed those guys on offense this year. It showed, and unfortunately, no rest for the weary. They come back home, and then they got to go up to Durham to play the Wildcats. Could be a long afternoon for Eli Gardner's Skyhawks.
Yeah, especially considering that Stony Brook's been one of the, I think poor teams in the FCS the last few years, and to lose by, 3 touchdowns is, I was a little surprising. I think you and I were both kind of, bullish on picking Stony Brook and might have even gone Stonehill because of that. But, 236 yards, Smash Cross is pretty good considering you're missing all those guys. But, 260 rushing yards allowed on defense is it's tough, So
they're undersized and it showed.
Right. Yeah. It's last year, I think they punched above their weight and looked more like a FCS program. But, this year you got to wonder, how the portal's really going to affect a school like that. One of their best tackles, went to UNH, for example, like you're missing guys to just jump up to another conference like that within the FCS. So, it's going to be, I think, a tough year if it's going to be a lot of games like this.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, let's pivot here and let's preview the week that is upon us, which is week 3. And of course, we're going to start with the big matchup, Boston College at Missouri. We're going to pick it and break it down. So let's start with this one. Missouri favored by 16, which Missouri's good, but 16 I think is a little bit of a thick number here considering how good Boston College has looked so far. Must win for BC. We talked about that. I mean, I think if they win this game, now all of a sudden the conversation changes with them. Now you got to put them in the ACC title conversation. And if they have the kind of season that they hope to have, they could find themselves in the 12-team playoff, which would be unbelievable for this program, considering the fact that they haven't won 8 games since 2009. Look, I think 16 is a big number in terms of a bet. From a betting standpoint, I'm going to put my money on Boston College here. I think that they can cover that as a dog. I'm not picking them to win, though. I think that they'll play well. I think this will be a good game. But I think Luther Bird and that Missouri skill group, Coach Drinkwitz does a great job there. They beat Missouri a couple of years ago here in 2021. I don't see them being able to do it out there. That being said, I see Missouri winning, but I only see them winning by 7 to 10 points.
Yeah, a lot of, obviously 6 is a big number to be next to Mizzou, but a lot of their games last year were close games, were a lot of close wins, right? And, a couple of them against some teams of not very high profile that they, had to kind of escape out of those. So that's not to, again, put them down. They're a very talented team. So I think that number's crazy. I'm totally taking BC to cover. I don't know if they'll be in it super close to the game. I think it might be, a 7-point, 10-point loss, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they, keep it close to the end and maybe lose by a field goal. But if they lose if Mizzou covers, that'd be very disappointing after all the progress BC's made. But I don't know, the momentum's really shifting their way. I mean, you win this weekend, you're probably up to like 16, 17 in the poll, potentially.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that
they'll make a big jump if they win this week.
Yeah. So I'm taking Mizzou similarly, but I'm taking Mizzou as well, but I do not think that they'll cover that big amount, the Tigers. So
no, neither do I. The Boston College is for real. That wasn't Florida State is not what they were last year. I get that argument. It's a good argument, but to go down there and to whack them the way they did, it's not easy to win in Tallahassee. They were able to do that. Forget about the Duquesne game. We said that they were 2-0 after the Florida State game. It's about the next 2 weeks. And really, if you're a Boston College football fan, if they come out of these next 2 games either 3-1 or 4-0, you should be pretty happy, because either way you look at it, the rest of that schedule, looking at them on paper, the rest of that schedule is pretty manageable. Yeah, you got Syracuse in there. Fran Brown's doing a pretty good job. They're playing better. You got Virginia Tech. Eventually you'll have North Carolina. But it's a manageable schedule. You got Louisville in there. Those are going to be their toughest games left, but it's more than manageable for them if they get through this stretch, either 3-1 or 4-0. All right, next up, the alma mater, UMass, is traveling to Buffalo to take on Pete Lembo's Bulls. Buffalo is favored by 3.5. The total is 44.5. And this one's a tough one for me, because I do think that the Brownies can go up there and win. But the question you have to ask yourself, Ryan Barry, is, do you trust the alma mater? Have they done enough to show you through 2 weeks that they can go on the road and win a game like this?
I don't trust them more than I trust my godson to lie to me that he's, supposed to go to bed actually at, 10 instead of 8 when I babysit. You know what I mean? Like, it's not there. I'm taking UMass though. With that being said, I'm taking them because this was a game I did have a win beginning of the season, right? Regardless of what I thought coming into it, I did have this as a win. I do think that there's a lot of momentum with the program as far in certain skill groups and certain positions. Like, they're stopping the run. Buffalo doesn't have a very strong run game. They have a mobile quarterback. They struggled against dual threat quarterbacks last year. So, but he doesn't have the strongest arm. They don't have a lot of skill weapons at wide receiver. If you can shut that down, I don't see how Buffalo moves the ball, right? Sean Dolek's a very good linebacker on that Buffalo defense. They have some pretty good corners in the secondary as well. So they need to get the run game going, and it did not show up at all last week. So I'm taking UMass. I do think they win, but again, do I ever feel confident about it? No, right? But I do think that on paper, they are better. This is a 3-9 Buffalo team from last year that lost a lot of players. It's not like they gained a whole ton of skill. I'm going UMass here, but I also understand why people don't pick them. So.
Yeah, look, this one's a hard one for me, because coming into the game, Buffalo's 1-1. You mentioned they went 3-9 last year. Look, we keep talking about whether or not UMass is going to be bowl eligible and how many games they're going to win and what it's going to take. Well, if you believe that this is a 5 or 6 win team, then this should be one of the games that they win. This should be one of their 5 or 6 wins. So I'm with you. I'm going to go UMass here. I think that number is manageable at 3.5. I think that they're a nice dog to play here. They could be a nice little play if you want to make some money, if you want to throw a decent amount down on them. I don't know if I would. And Don, we trust to a point, though. But I do think they get it done. And our good friend Pete Lembo is probably not going to want to hear that. But I think that this is a tight game. I think it's a close game. But I think ultimately UMass finds a way and they pull away, I should say, and they pick up their first win of the season. I just realized, by the way, just looking into the screen here, my nose is awfully shiny tonight.
Until you pointed it out, I wouldn't have known.
I'm hoping my glasses don't go bloop.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, what? I don't know why it's so shiny.
Yeah.
Anyway, All right, next up we have UConn travels down to Duke. They're visiting the great state of North Carolina. The Blue Devils are coming into this one 2-0 under first-year coach Manny Diaz. They're favored by 16.5. So I think what this comes down to is two things. One, do you believe the UConn team that went to Maryland week 1 is the team that's going to show up here? Or do you believe that not necessarily the team that we saw last week plays at Duke, but a facsimile thereof?
Right.
Do you believe that they're going to be more like the team we saw this week that blew out Merrimack? So I think you have to figure out which UConn team you think you're going to see.
Yeah.
And the other thing you have to think about is this Duke offense good enough to beat them by 3 scores? I don't know. I don't know if they score enough to win by 3 scores. But either way you look at it, 16.5 is a big number. But if you told me you were taking Duke, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I'm taking Duke to win, but I don't think they'll cover that. They've only scored 26 points in the last 2 weeks. You know, they only had 26 points against Elon. Elon is one of the stronger programs in the FCS, especially the CAA this season. But you know, they're still trying to recover. They've, you know, new coach trying to figure out what to do without Riley Leonard. You know, their quarterback Murphy is decent enough. 534 passing yards in 2 games isn't bad.
The Texas transfer.
Yeah, they did go on the road and beat Northwestern at that, you know, high school stadium on the lake, which I don't care. Actually, I think that looks really cool. They should just keep it because it's right on the water. But I do think I'm going to take Duke to win, but I think I would definitely take I don't know if I would take the under at 47.5, but I do think I'd take Duke. I would take UConn to cover, but I would take Duke outright just because I think they've got more skill. They really beat up on the Huskies last year and blew them out. I just don't see how the Huskies are 21 points better than they were last year to somehow win, you know? So I'm going to take the Blue Devils, but I don't think they'll blow them out.
Yeah, the total is 47.5. I mean,
Right.
You know, to your point, they've scored 26 points in each of their first 2 games. So it's Manny Diaz, defensive coach.
Right.
If you got to figure they're going to play some pretty good defense in this one. They're not as much of an athlete as Murphy is. They're not exactly explosive on offense. So I'm with you. I don't touch the total because I wouldn't be surprised if this was a 35-7 kind of game.
Right.
I mean, 47.5, it's tricky because Duke could potentially score more than that, but I don't see it. I don't think they're great offensively. So I do think they'll cover that number, though. I'm sorry, UConn fans. Love you guys. Big fan of UConn football, big fan of UConn sports, but I need to see more from this UConn team. I'm bullish on them. I said this earlier, so I do sound a little bit hypocritical when I say that, that Duke's going to cover that number, but I need to see more. I need to see this offense perform at a high level this week and score 21 plus points. I think if I see that, then I'm probably going to be more bullish on this team. But until I do, I've been burned. I've been burned by UConn the last 2 years. Not so much 2 years ago. 2 years ago, they surprised all of us, but I got burned last year when they went 3-9. Yeah, and I'm not sure that I want to go down this road again. So I know I'm making way more out of this than I should, but I think at the end of the day, you could be right here, my friend. I could end up regretting this, but I'm going Duke here, and I do think they cover that 16.5.
No, that's fair. I don't always want to bring it back to UMass, but it's like when you've been burned, it's hard to get back on there. My wife said to me when I came home from the Eastern Michigan game, she said, if UMass football were a friend of yours, they'd be a toxic friend, and I wouldn't want you to hang out with them anymore. And I was. Because I came home so flustered, and she was just like,
That's a great line.
Yeah, she's like, I wish I could tell you can't hang out with them anymore, but that's not how that works. So, yeah. But so I get you on being burned 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, next up we have Stonehill at UNH. So this is the part of the program now where we make up the lines. So we're going to make UNH a 17-point favorite here. Home opener for the Wildcats in Durham. I was at this game a year ago in Easton. They blew out Stonehill. I mean, they hung 51 on them. This UNH team isn't as good as that team, but this Stonehill team isn't as good as that team. I think this is probably a spread that would be more than 17. So I'm actually going to bump this to 21.5, Barry. Do you take it? Do you take that number there? UNH over Stonehill at 21.5. The over on this one is the total rather is 50.5.
17.5, absolutely. 21, I'm nervous about just because I think, I don't know if necessarily think that Stonehill is that much better to get closer. I don't think UNH is also 51 points better this year. So I think it maybe falls right around 20, right? So I think that is kind of fair. So I will take it just because I do think that, the Skyhawks struggle against the run. Isaac Seed really found his legs last week. I think that this is the game that you see Seth Morgan kind of figure it out and feel more comfortable and spread the ball around more, right, to Caleb Burke and Joey Corcoran. So I think they do cover that. I think it's going to be a game. It's under the lights at night. I think it'll be a fun atmosphere in Durham. So I think maybe something like a 38-14. I don't know. Is that 21, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So something like that, I think I could totally see.
Yeah, I mean, look, you don't have Dylan Lobby, you don't have a lot of the talent that they had last year, but they're still pretty good. You mentioned Tomlinson, you mentioned some of the other receivers there. Isaac Seed is primed for a big year. I think in many ways he's not Dylan Lobby in terms of the versatility and the explosiveness, but I think he's more of a traditional back, and in that West Coast oriented system, I think he's poised to put up big numbers. I think this is a guy that's going to push 1,600 yards rushing, and he could end up with double-digit touchdowns by the end of the season. So, look, UNH is not what they were offensively last year, but they're still pretty darn good. You still have a pretty good defense. I think that front seven is going to get after Karaha. I think that, that Stonehill defense is a bit undersized. They're going to struggle with this running game. So, yeah, I see them covering 21.5. I could see this being 42-14 kind of game. I think UNH wins, and I think that, they prove that they are one of the better teams in the CAA, but they also prove that they have much more talent than Stonehill, who is still an infant, if you think about it,
absolutely,
in the Division I world. All right, next up, we have Campbell visiting URI. As we mentioned earlier, URI coming off a tough 48-0 loss. The Rams are favored by 3.5 in this one over the Camels. I'm going to go with the Rams here. I think they get it done. I think they bounce back. It's a big week for their offense. Pat Murphy probably went back to the drawing board. Too much talent for them to get shut out, even by Minnesota. Devin Farrell started last week's game. Hunter Helms finished it. Both of them struggled through a couple picks. But I think the Rams get back on track here and pick up a much-needed win to improve to 2-1 on the season. I think they beat Campbell by 7.
Yeah, my research actually wants me to take Campbell, but I'm going to take URI because it's at home, and I think they'll bounce back and kind of get their stuff together. But Campbell's a pretty decent program in the Big South OVC, I think, as they are merged now.
Yeah, so you're down with OVC. Yeah, you know me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Bryant wasn't apparently, and they left. So, yeah. But I don't know. I think I'm going to go URI because maybe I feel like a homer, but Campbell played and hung with Liberty pretty well, and I think Liberty has a chance to be one of the group of 5 teams to make it into the college football playoff this year. They run the ball pretty well, but I just think coming up here is going to be tough, so I'm going to go with the Rams.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I'm going with the Rams as well, although like you said, Campbell hung with Liberty. So, all right, Maine is back home in Orono. They will host Monmouth. As we said earlier, Black Bears hung in there, played tough against a very good Montana State team. This is a winnable game. And as I said earlier, I think that this Maine offense is going to keep going and get better and get better and get better as the year goes on. Look, Monmouth is a program that traditionally, since they've been in the CAA, has done pretty well in the portal. They've been able to go out and get guys that can come in and play there and contribute. And this year is no different. But they're 0-2 to start the season. Maine is favored here by 7, and I'm going to take the Black Bears here. I think that I'm more bullish on them than I've ever been. I think that this is a big year for Jordan Stevens and this staff. Like I said, I really like this skill group. I like PV at quarterback. I think that the Black Bears get it done and improve to 2-1.
The biggest thing that I'm intrigued about with this game is the fact that Derek Robertson is the quarterback for Monmouth. Yeah. So there's part of me that's going to think, I'm sure there's
revenge game.
There.
And
Yeah, right.
let's not forget, he had a great year last year for Maine.
He did. He was the guy that kept that program from, I mean, I know they only won 2 games, but he kept them much more afloat than I thought that they would have been. So I'm going to take Maine here. I do think that Monmouth will cover. 7. Maine they need to get their running game going well. We know Moss is solid, right? And uh, Carter Peavy starting to figure things out, but they need to run the ball better. But what's good is the Monmouth doesn't really either. But Derek Robertson's pretty excellent. So I think this could be potentially a high scoring game. And they only lost by 5 to Lafayette, who's one of the better teams in the Patriot League. Lost by 2 touchdowns to Eastern Washington, who's a very talented team out west in the FCS. So that does concern me a little bit for this pick because they haven't been getting blown out of games. And Derek Robertson's awesome. So I fear that Monmouth could go up there and sneak one out, but I'm going to take the Black Bears at home in a revenge game against Derek.
Against Derek. Yeah, me too. All right, next up we have Holy Cross and Bryan. Of course, the Crusaders are in uncharted territory here. They enter this game at 0-2. Bryant coming off a 21-17 win over Franklin Pierce. I got a Holy Cross favorite in this one by 3.5.
Okay. Yeah, I'm taking Holy Cross big time. I'm also taking them to cover that pretty solidly. I think it'll be interesting to see how they fare down at Bryant. I don't know if this is their first visit they've ever had there, but it's not like Holy Cross looks bad. I mean, Joe Pazanski looked solid at times last week, right? It's just, his interception in the season came at the end of the game, kind of hucking it up. But there's a lot of great talent on that team, right? And I think that the biggest thing that I did notice last week is Jordan Fuller really struggled to run the ball. He kind of came on a little bit more towards the end of the game, but UNH had a really good game plan against him, and he only had, I think it was like 2.7 yards a carry or something like that, maybe, or 3.7. So I don't think that Bryan is as talented enough to make that happen, but I think this is a game that they should just feed Fuller and try and get him kind of back to where he was a lot last year. So I'm definitely taking the Crusaders and to cover.
Yeah, I look. This is, for me, this is a must-win for both programs, but especially Holy Cross. I mean, let's not forget they're still going to be among the favorites in the Patriot League, but
right.
Now they're going to need to win it. But even if they win it, there's no guarantee, depending on how they finish, that they get in. You'd think that they would. So everything that they're playing for is still in front of them, but it starts this week because then you got Yale coming into town the following week. So You need this one. This is a big one. Look, I think for Bryan, if Jared Guest plays well, I think their defense will play well. They need more than Landon Ruggieri, though. That running game needs to get going. They need to get Fabrice McKendy going, Ryan Clark, get those guys going. I think if they get that running game going, they should be able to hang in this one. But I'm with you. I think ultimately Holy Cross is able to establish Fuller. Pazanski, I think, plays well. I think they cover that number. I think they pick up their first win in the season, which should be a pretty good game. I mean, again, Bryan is playing a tough CAA slate, but they also beefed up the schedule non-conference wise. All right, we're going to go the FCS independent route here real quick. And, of course, we have Sacred Heart hosting Georgetown. Georgetown is favored in this one by 7.5. We talked about Sacred Heart's offensive problems earlier. I don't think that they get solved. I think that they continue to struggle here. I think that Georgetown, who comes into this one 2-0, moves the ball fairly. They'll have trouble moving the ball, but they'll do enough on offense to win this game. They'll be able to stop the Sacred Heart offense. I think they cover that number easily. Give me the Hoyas in this one.
I concur. Absolutely. I think if they're 2-0, took down Maris and Davidson. So I don't know. I'm just worried about the Pals this year. This game could be like a 21-3 type deal, right? So just the defense plays well, just the offense has got to pick them up. But I think Georgetown is one of the better teams in that conference, and I think gets the win.
Yeah, I agree. Georgetown takes care of business. And for Sacred Heart, again, got to figure it out offensively. Until they do, it's going to be tough to get that program back to a place where they can compete and win week in and week out. Merrimack heads out to Bucknell. The Bison, who beat VMI last week, are favored in this one by, they're favored in this one by 6.5. Look, for Merrimack, impressive week 1 in a 21-6 loss to Air Force. You get blown out last week. This is a winnable game for them. It's another long bus ride, but it is a winnable game for them. I'm going to go Merrimack here. I know Bucknell beat VMI last week, but I think this Merrimack team has a lot of talent. And I think they're getting into a part of their schedule now where they are going to be able to compete and potentially win games. And they've got some big ones coming up. They host Maine, they host Dartmouth. They've got some big games. I mean, kudos to the Merrimack administration.
Yeah.
They're playing a great schedule as an independent. Sacred Heart needs to look at them and say, that's what we need to do. Because, again, it's about building your brand as well. I'm going Merrimack here. I think Coach Genetti's squad gets their first win of the season. I think it's a hard-fought game, but I think they cover that number as a dog. I think they win by 7.
I think it's a must-win because of who they have coming up. Like you said, Maine, Dartmouth. These are going to be really tough games. I mean, which again, it's awesome that they're hosting those. So I didn't do as much research. I didn't get this to as much on this game and look up Bucknell as much as I would have wanted to. But earlier in the season, I did have in my preview for the year Merrimack beating the Bison. So I'm going to go Merrimack here. I don't love that it's away. It's a long bus ride, like you said. Those parts of Pennsylvania are tough to drive to, right? Especially from this area. So it's going to be a long one and it'll be a tough loss, but I'm going to go with the win.
All right, me too. And as I mentioned, they have Maine next week and then Dartmouth in 2 weeks. So both games we're going to be covering here at New England Football Journal. So there you go. All right, let's go over to the NEC here as we make our way around the D1 landscape here in college football. Got a few minutes left in this one. Central Connecticut State coming off a big win over Fordham. They traveled to St. Francis, who's coming off a big win over Kent State. An FBS program. St. Francis is favored in this one by 7.5. This is a tough one for me. I'm going to take St. Francis. I think they're at home. Central Connecticut, decent ride down to St. Francis. I don't know if they can carry some of that momentum over. I think St. Francis does carry some of the momentum over from beating Kent State. I'm going with St. Francis here. I'm going with St. Francis here to win. I don't think they cover, though. I think they only win by a field goal. I think Central Connecticut State plays them tough.
Yeah, similarly, had they not beaten Kent State last week, I think I would have taken Central Connecticut in this game because of last week. But I do think they could catch some sleeping, though, in some ways. They're coming off the high of beating an FBS team, and, but I do want to remember, St. Francis was picked to win the NEC. They're the team that's to beat in that league, and so I'm going to go SFA, but I agree with you that I do think that this game, they will cover this game and might be able to sneak a win out of it. I won't be shocked if they do, but just because of those intangibles, I'm going to go with St. Francis.
Yeah, and of course, we already picked Stonehill UNH. We both picked UNH in that one. So that does it for the NEC. So we've talked Boston College, we've talked UMass, we've talked UConn, we've talked CAA, we've talked Independence, we've talked NEC. The only conference we haven't talked about is the Ivy League. They kick off next weekend. So you get a pretty good slate there. Yale, Holy Cross, Stetson visits Harvard, Brown visits Georgetown, and Dartmouth opens with Fordham, I believe. So should be a pretty good slate there. Yes, I am correct. September 21st, they open at home against Fordham. So there you go. All right, man. Final thoughts before we wrap up. Did I miss anything or anybody?
No, I think you got them all. It's an okay weekend. It's an okay slate. It's not the best. Not as many home games, that's for sure. A lot of away games this weekend for programs in New England. So just excited for the Ivy League to get here next week, and because there's a lot of great teams in that conference in New England this year. So I'm really excited to start getting to them, and there's some really good games to them coming up. So
yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of good local games within the Ivy League, the Patriot League, the NEC. Yeah. So we're getting a lot of cross-conference matchups here in New England. And that's part of the reason why I love that Merrimack is an independent, because I think we're going to see some really good games, from them in the coming years. I mean, it's awesome until they figure it out conference-wise. But selfishly, we love it. We love the fact that they have Maine and Dartmouth coming in the next couple of weeks. So
it means way more. When Harvard opened against Merrimack last year, or the year before, that I love that compared to Stetson. You know what I mean? Like, it's just playing locally. You get more fans of the games. It's a lot more interest. It's just so much better when we're all playing each other. Even I know, when you're trying to recruit a lot of the same kids, there's a risk that runs with that. But at the same time, it's just, I love seeing that, especially, that Merrimack game, that sideline for Harvard was packed, so.
No, and of course, Merrimack played UMass last year. Central Connecticut State will be there in a couple of weeks. They're playing UMass. So it's great to see. It's great to see. I've said it before since we started this thing. I would love to see BC play UConn and UMass every year. I know that I sound like I'm a Yankee Conference traditionalist or an old Big East guy. I think it would be great for New England football if the 3 FBS programs in the region all played, and if they played for something.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
in most years, BC would be favored. I get it. But we're talking about UConn here and UMass going into the MAC. Those programs are going to get better. So I wish they would play each other. Unfortunately, it happens very sparingly. But nonetheless, we got a big one this week for Boston College. UMass needs to get on the right side of the ledger here, and UConn needs to prove that last week wasn't a fluke among many other games. All right, Ryan, great job as always, my friend. Let's do this
You
again
as
next
well.
week.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, John.
All
Thank you,
right, well,
everybody.
that'll do it for the college football preview show. For Ryan Barry, I'm John Sirenitas. Till next week, peace.